Welcome. Tiny Hands, Big Dreams, here with a controversial conversation from the edge of the Amazon. The question comes up, are we allowed to be part of nature? Are we allowed to modify nature? Are we allowed to change the world around us, or should we just coexist somehow with everything? We get comments of like we're clearing land, and today I've been doing a bunch of it. There was some trees that have grown really fast that we were going to leave that were right around the house. We had this like lovely little tree cover, and I looked at them and I'm like, since we started building the house, you're double. eh, eh, eh. And then we had another tree fall somewhere else, and I opted to go ahead and like we're gonna clear this. They'll grow right back, but oh my gosh, you're cutting down trees and clearing land.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've gotten those comments a few times, and it's a pretty regular conversation that people have. I take the stance of and I listened to a podcast at some point where someone said this, and I can't for the life of me remember who because they've listened to too many. Of sort of the idea that human beings have been somewhere along the line told that they are not part of nature, that we're against it, we're other than, and that's silly because we are an animal. We are part of the world. We are part of nature.
Yeah.
Just because we have created homes, societies, things that look like not part of nature, that doesn't mean that we are not.
I don't know. I mean, Big Ant Mound doesn't look like much part of nature. Like it's clearly a created structure.
Or I like the metaphor of the beaver. You know, people are all upset we're cutting down trees, but the beavers do. Nobody is upset with them.
Right.
Or maybe some people are, but
no, they're
part of
nature. They knock
nature.
down trees. They dam water.
They greatly alter their ecosystem. But they're also seen as part of the ecosystem. Whereas humans aren't part. We're against.
Bastards.
We're a problem.
We're bastards for doing it.
Now, I mean, I guess on the flip side, do I think that the way that some human beings approach nature is correct? No. I don't think coming and just clear cutting an entire mountain is always a great idea.
Which we watch our neighbors do.
More or less. I mean, they don't really clear cut.
Sometimes
they clear.
Yeah, they'll clear. They'll sell the trees, and they'll put cows in.
Yeah. And that's fine. I mean, I don't really know if there's a problem with that. I think if you don't do it carefully, at least here, we can end up with landslides, which is something where, someone asked at some point, we got a comment of how we clear and alter land, like we dug the house site without then having erosion problems. And honestly, we're just really careful about it. We're really thoughtful about it.
Yeah. Yeah, when you modify the land too much, then it gives out on you.
I think we both err towards the side of, well, we'll just leave the tree. When we're clearing, we're like, oh, well, we'll just leave that one, and we'll just leave that one.
And then one of them will fall.
And then eventually we end up having to go back and be like, okay, we have to take out the trees that we were going to keep because there's no light, because they're going to fall on something important, because.
Or they get attacked by insects, and then they just start rotting.
And then they'll fall and cause disaster.
Which is the natural cycle.
Yeah. Which is a perfectly fine natural cycle, except when you are a human being trying to live somewhere.
There's trees. There's learning to live with the creatures. We've mentioned the phrase pushing back nature. So there's some of these trees have huge ant nests in them. If you watched our Friday Frolic, we actually had a big picture of one. It's like 6 foot looking like hornet nesting with ants. There's a lot of bugs that get held, and so opening up a little bit of space, and we're finding with the garden, you just have to have a bit of a barrier, and then predators, ducks and chickens, to push back nature.
Yeah.
If we try to just live with nature harmoniously, we would feed the grasshoppers forever.
Yeah.
We would not win. We were just now part of feeding them at the cost of our labor.
Yeah.
Which doesn't really work.
So I think that a lot of it is No, I don't want to just destroy nature. I love nature. That's why we live here. That's why we've chosen to live here. But we want to be self-sufficient. We want to grow our own food. We want to, we just want to be sort of an isolated little mountain island. And there are people who want to go be off-grid and live in the middle of a forest and then go buy all of their food. If that's your choice, that's fine. Then you can really live without altering your natural environment very much.
It's a very energy intensive lifestyle for that food to be grown, the thing to transport.
But if you're looking purely at an individual's, well, see, that's where it gets a little tricky, because it isn't, because then you look at how much, if you're just going and buying food, how much are you affecting nature? Far more than we would be growing our own.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit of a wider look at things. But there are people who think that we shouldn't be cutting down trees, or we shouldn't be, we kill ants. So let's talk about the ants.
Okay. We have problems with ants.
And bugs in general.
And bugs in general.
So we have army ants. I mean, we have lots of ants. We have leaf cutters, which I have always thought are very interesting ants. They're very cool on a nature video. They're a little less cool if they find, like, your banana tree or something and decimate it.
They will deforest a garden overnight if you get a good trail going.
Yeah. So
do we have conflict with them? Yeah.
Do we go kill every single one we can find? No.
No.
They are part of nature.
Yeah.
Now the army ants, when we first discovered that we had army ants, we were sort of terrified. Because a lot of, I guess, types of army ants will actually attack larger creatures.
Yeah.
So we were very concerned about that. It turns out the ones we have pretty much just raid other ant nests and take eggs.
Yeah, they're really just looking for the eggs.
Which is not a bad thing.
Now, when they come in, they are terrifying. They come in huge numbers, in lines. They call them army ants for a reason. They come in like an army. Full attack mode.
They're
huge numbers, very aggressive.
Intelligent. They very much have a system and a society. And
they react very quickly. You stomp a line of them, and boom, they'll turn around and they'll back, and then they'll come around in a different line and come from a different direction. Yeah. They'll just keep fingering across the landscape, which is really kind of terrifying. And they move fast.
They're so fast. You turn around and they're right there.
And you go to get the torch, and now they're 100 yards up the hill by the time you make it back.
So once we, at first we're like, oh, we have to kill all of them. We need to destroy, because they could be a risk to our animals. They could hurt us. Ours don't seem to at all, really. They don't go after bugs even. They don't really go after anything except just other ant eggs, which honestly isn't so bad since we have so many ants. So that's where we start talking. We start talking about, do we really want to get rid of all the army ants? Because they're then raiding other ant nests that cause us problems.
Right.
So where is that line?
And
which has sort of become a perimeter of our home line.
Yeah, we've become less and less of alarmist when something happens and there's huge, numbers of them. We're like, stay there, stop here. We'll kind of stomp them, and they
we'll occasionally burn a line if they're getting just really aggressive or really close.
Yeah.
But we haven't really continued the massive takeout like we used to hunt them down through the forest, because we honestly were just more concerned about them.
If they had enough numbers, and sometimes they show up in the millions, that they would, if they came across one of our goats, they would.
Yeah.
They can kill it.
But ours specifically don't seem to have any interest,
which is very, very interesting about almost all the animals here. Very much just non-aggressive.
Even the scary snakes.
Animal kingdom.
Now we have these scary snakes.
We do.
Super deadly.
Yeah, we see them every so often.
Not terribly aggressive. They would mostly like to be left alone.
Yeah.
And that is the majority of, I guess, really how we manage the animals, the creatures, the insects, the things, is we don't necessarily need to kill them. We just need them to not be here. I have no desire to go hunt down the few smaller predators we have or anything. I I just want them to go away.
Yeah.
Um,
So there's
but
some, yeah. So the ants are one. Possums come
yeah.
up.
Oh man, the possum
The possum debate of people like, oh, there's a possum in my yard, I think, or something, and then other people are like, oh, you have to learn to live with it. They're
Oh, they're
great,
so
wonderful,
wonderful.
and they're gentle creatures. You've never had a possum chase you in his statue, apparently.
You've never tried to get rid of a possum and have it just not go away. They're tough creatures. They don't have correct feelings or pain sensors. They're just weird.
Don't think you're going to win against a possum in a fight.
No. And possums will mess with chickens. Absolutely.
Yeah.
They also carry diseases. They're also destructive. They're all these things. But lots of people will say you just have to learn to live with them. I don't actually have to learn to live with them. That's it. I don't have to.
Some that were here, right? Like
they were such a pain.
And the
digging
dog,
up everything.
Yeah, digging up everything. And the dog mostly would bark at them.
Well, once we got the dog, the possums just sort of left.
Yeah.
That was, like...
There's enough activity that they just like,
The more we cleared, and then he would bark at them, and they just sort of slowly left.
Yeah, they just... There was a Tyra, too, which was a similar thing. Tyra is a...
I want to say it's not a weasel. It's the closest thing I could say.
But
it is a Tyra. There's nothing else like it.
Yeah.
We thought it was a big weasel. More research says no, it's a Tyra, which is a Tyra.
Yeah.
It is a relatively large creature that is somewhat predatory over small creatures.
And it totally could eat a lot of
very
our
fast.
They're amazing and graceful and beautiful and
climb trees and jump things and swim and basically
up and down
everything.
Cliffs.
They're super.
And there was one that was right there at the edge of our yard. Would
go up and down and
And after a while,
which actually would pose a pretty solid risk to many of our creatures.
Yeah.
And then again, like I think it was just our activity.
A little bit of open space and the dog, and they're just like,
we'll just go somewhere else.
And it's just sort of
elsewhere
pushed a little. Like we didn't have to kill it, we didn't have to thing. So this is like the line that we try to dance back and forth.
And that was a big part of getting the dog. Now, I mean, he's a small little dog, but his bark is big. He's a big bark.
The front half of him is much bigger than the back half.
So his bark is big and it echoes.
Yeah.
And he smells something, who knows what it is, and he barks at it. I'm like, okay. Well then he's pushed off a whole bunch of creatures and without hurting anything. So people are like, oh, some people hunt them, some people trap them, some people blah blah blah. We just want them to move on. And there is so much land around us for them to move on to. It's
managing the interactions. Pacas, we had pacas run through the yard here, which is a strange creature.
They're like a small capybara.
Giant rat dog thing.
No, they won't hurt anything.
Except each other.
Which is
they have the ability to hurt. I poked one with a spoon one day.
It's a weird story.
It's a funny story.
So, as far as the nature and how we manage it.
But it's like, did we move out to, a pristine section of the edge of the Amazon and affect it with our human activity and clear it a bit? Yes. But it had already been cleared.
But beyond that, why is that seen as something bad?
And that's why is that like, oh, we're terrible?
Now, we're not deforesting. That word has been thrown around. I don't like that word. I see deforesting as a mass, destroy. There is deforestation of the Amazon that is happening. That is horrible.
Yeah.
And very, very destructive.
Bulldozer and fire and just...
And that is a completely different kind of destructive that I do not agree with and I think is detrimental to nature for not a real solid reason. Yeah. I'm not sure what the reason is. Money?
Yeah, usually cows.
Money.
More room for cows, which is
equates to money.
The easiest way to get money in some places.
Yeah. So,
if there were better jobs that were sent to places in South America, instead of say China, you would probably then watch people then not work.
Probably.
In clearing land and things, and just go and work at a job.
Possibly. But no, we are not deforesting. We're actually incredibly thoughtful and careful about what we're doing. Partially for ourselves, honestly, because we like trees. And we don't want the land to be destroyed.
We
This
don't
is
want
our home.
a landslide to happen. We do like the shade and the beauty that they bring, the birds that they hold.
But there's also, and when it comes to the trees, I don't know the argument about like having all these trees. That's great. You can't raise food in a forest. And I know that people like to think that you can.
So we're already short on light. If we didn't have mountains that we were next to, we would have 12 hours of light.
Because we are in a valley. We're not at the bottom of the valley, but
because we're in a valley, we only get this.
We sit like here.
Instead of, this. And we're on this side. So by the time the sun gets up and actually hits the ground, we're 9, 10 o'clock. And then by the time it drops over the far hill...
It's like 5.
Yeah.
5:30.
So 7, 8 hours tops.
Which is really less than would be ideal.
When there's not clouds. And there's very frequently, very cloudy days, mostly cloudy, so you can easily cut that in half. So we're like, okay, 3-4 hours a day of light. Growing things is slower under those conditions.
And even if you aren't in those conditions, there are people who want to live in a forest, and that's great, and that's beautiful, and I also like forests and trees, but you cannot grow food in that.
No.
And I don't care what you say, you can't grow food in that.
You can't have solar panels.
Also true.
Yeah, we had to take a few out. There's still, right now, there's a big shadow on my solar panels. Happens in the afternoon from a big, pretty tree that's above our maracuja. I just happen to like it. So we acknowledge that we lose some solar power in the afternoons.
We may end up taking it out.
I reserve the right to.
But we don't want to. There's many trees we've taken out that we didn't really want to.
And are we morally wrong for considering it? It's an interesting debate.
And I think a lot of it just comes back, and I wrote about this on the Substack of Are We Part of Nature?
It's an excellent article. It is worth reading if you haven't found that yet.
Because it never really dawned on me before.
Are we animals? Do we get to be animals?
Because we are animals.
Do other creatures have more rights as animals than we do? And then why?
Well, and I know all the points people will try to make about, okay, so you shouldn't kill and eat animals. Why? The lions do it.
Your
parents
did it. Your forefathers
did it.
Well,
no, but if you look at it from an animal versus animal,
sure.
Because it's about are humans animals and part of nature. Well, you have tools to kill an animal. Sure. What does a lion use to kill an animal? Does it have tools attached to its body? Yep.
An otter will pick up a rock to crack a clam.
Yeah. Seagulls will drop things from the sky.
I watched a video about a monkey that picked up an AK-47.
Okay, well
that was kind of comical.
Oh boy. So the monkeys. We are in the land of monkeys. And we are not that far removed from the monkeys. But somehow the monkeys are not, I don't know, they're not questioned.
No,
well, that's just nature. That's just what they do.
They're allowed to do that. They're allowed to thing and chew onto this and kill a whatever.
Kill each other. I don't know. It's a very strange conversation of why, as humans, we are not allowed to do certain things. We are not seen as part of nature. We are seen as an enemy of nature.
Because at some point in time, like there was a time when you were allowed to do that and clear, and now you just have to stop, and everything should just be preserved.
And you should live in a city.
Ooh.
Which makes absolutely no logical sense. From a health of the world, health of nature standpoint, we are doing far more positive for nature by being here. And yes, clearing the land intentionally and carefully and thoughtfully, and improving soil and honestly improving a lot, then we would be living in a city and letting this have just sat here and done nothing.
We don't even feel good when we go to the city just because of the level of smog and pollutants. electromagnetic like pollution, everything about it just come back like, oh. And it takes a bit of time to like, okay, we got rid of that. So is that better? Like why is this utopia city thing become?
And then there's, are we actually making the ecosystem that I think we are a part of here better? Which I would argue that we are. There's a lot of regenerative farming where you're taking land that isn't good, it isn't good soil because it has been, so basically in our situation, part of the reason why we sort of have a scrub jungle is because people came in and removed the large trees.
Just the big ones.
Just the big ones, which alters the ecosystem of a jungle. So then all your smaller trees, your vines, your bushes, your things get bigger. And then it blocks all sunlight. And then you end up having a different...
Gosh, I used to know the names of rushes and forbs and things. And like there's the cycles of like...
Yeah,
there's
the
been
layers.
A disturbance that rebuilds. First the fast growing things, and then that lets the slightly bigger and something. But at some point, it's just impenetrable mess, along with the detritus of the tops of the trees that they didn't want, which take a decade to compose.
So we are trying to actually better it from what it was. And I think it's maybe a specific point just to us, but we have gotten a little bit of flack as, quote, foreigners coming to Ecuador and deforesting and altering. Now, aside from the conversation of like, are we part of nature? Just as maybe a side note, we are actually the less destructive of the people who have been on this land. I'm just saying.
Or of a lot honestly, of our neighbors.
So
we have one neighbor that actually just recently is we were just watching the gianty trees on the property next door. They're just going down.
Big, beautiful trees.
Because they are going to do something with that land.
Or the wood, which is what I think is probably most likely.
It's possible.
Cutting it into boards, and which is also their prerogative as creatures with tools.
Yeah.
Do I necessarily agree? I mean, no, but honestly, then other people don't agree with what we're doing. So then you look at that. Is that wrong for them to be cutting down the big, beautiful trees? Is it?
And there's a line there. So I used to live in a redwood forest in California. Very few of that exists. Very, very few of those trees. And I've also been up to like Humboldt County, which was historically the biggest of the trees, where they logged heavily. Some of those trees 8-10 feet in diameter. I got to see one where they had taken the trunk of it and they'd carved steps up the side of it, carved bench seating around both sides, and a picnic table in the middle out of the trunk. Just what was left. It could seat 10 people. All part of just the stump. And then stairs down the other side. And it was just like, my God, those trees don't, like those
were
1,000, 1,500 year old
they had those
tree.
up in Washington too. Many years ago, where they'd have whole houses that were from the stumps of the giant trees.
They're mostly gone. Were they allowed? Were they allowed to? Was it right for them to do it?
And who determines if it's right?
And who determines at what point that it stops being right? Because at some point it did. It stopped being okay to do that.
And why?
I mean, I like them. I would like to see them preserved, but on the other hand,
it's a very...
people have to survive and make a living, and they do that by harvesting nature in the land around them.
And even if it isn't about money, on a more micro scale of like what we're doing, we're not taking out trees for giggles or money.
Yeah.
We're taking out trees so that we have more sun, so we can grow things, so we can eat, so we can survive. and be self-sufficient and not rely on people who are perhaps less thoughtful and careful, with larger food systems that are far more destructive. We are taking out trees
with far more pesticide use.
Yes. We are taking out trees that will one day probably fall on our house and cause great bodily harm. Seems like a fair thing to do. Same with like anything that threatens an animal structure. Basically, any structure that's threatened. I think we should have the right
to protect ourselves and our things.
You would think. You would think that is a morally upstanding.
It's like the right
decision.
of self-defense of your
against
your
the
own
trees.
person.
I would think so.
Against the trees, against it's the old man against nature.
And if you think about it, I mean, we're very, very careful. So when we cut down trees, we feed everything we can to the animals, the goats, the pigs, and then we use as much of the tree as we can for building a house, for building a garden, for whatever we can use that tree for.
Yeah.
And the rest of it, honestly, usually sits somewhere in a jungle and decomposes, which is what it would naturally do when it falls.
Yeah.
Because trees will eventually fall. And most of the trees we cut down would have eventually fallen and decomposed.
Which is something that a lot of people miss, and maybe a bit of a tangent. The carbon and carbon neutral is this big buzzword.
Carbon negative.
Carbon negative. I think when you actually look at it, it's a scam, to put it bluntly. But I had at one point a wood stove, and people were like, "Oh, you burn wood, this, and you're destroying trees." And I think about this for 2 seconds. Like, give me 2 seconds. I'm like, okay, I burn wood. Where did the wood get the energy to build the tree? Oh, well, it pulls carbon out of the environment and takes energy from the sun. Okay, solar powered. Got it. I burn it. What do? I return that carbon to the environment, and I extract the energy. Well, where does that carbon go? Into another tree. What happens if the tree just falls in the forest and rots? Well, it decomposes. Okay, so let's look at the decomposition process. What is that? Well, it releases the carbon into the environment. The same carbon? Yes, the same carbon. Just as much. Okay. So me burning trees to heat my house is literally carbon neutral. Oh.
Compared to what would happen if that tree fell.
Without transmission lines, without loss, without things, without, a lot of other problems. Actually, it's solar-powered carbon neutral if you want to get into it. Not that I think that the carbon thing is anything more than a scam for money. People are funny in their belief systems.
I guess that's part of it. It's like, why is altering nature just seen as a bad thing?
Like, look, I'm all for the environment. We moved here because it's lovely and clean, and we don't want the chemicals and the pesticides and the smokes and the burning of things and
trash and
all
pollution
of that.
So in that way,
I
mean, we
firmly believe
we're very careful. We're very thoughtful.
The world has a massive issue with pollution of all forms, and it's causing massive problems to humanity now, and it will for all foreseeable future, and it's getting worse. But
I'm not sure in the small ways in which we alter the nature we're part of.
Yeah.
That's like the worst thing.
Yeah.
And yet it gets very much focused on.
Yeah.
And I find that interesting. And I don't know why. I don't know why that's more focused on than the things that are destructive that people do.
Like just your drive to the store to buy groceries and the energy that went into making your groceries and the boxes and plastic that they came in. And that cost of energy and environment and toxins and things, you don't think about that? You think that's a clean process? Versus don't drive anywhere.
Do you think that there weren't trees where that plant, that factory one, come on.
Yeah.
You think they didn't cut any down? To build their giant steel monstrosity?
Which becomes a Superfund site when it's done and they abandon it.
Now we
don't drive much. Stay home mostly. Yeah.
We're building a house out of sticks and mud.
Yeah, because it's what's right here. It has the lowest energy embodiment, the lowest cost, the most benefit. it will do the job. It will be a beautiful house, and it is available.
And we don't want trees to fall on it.
Yeah, we don't want trees to fall on.
I don't think that's super silly there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I think it's an interesting conversation.
Let us know why we're silly. Maybe we don't get it. Why some people think that. Or maybe their belief system is not taking into account some of the facts, some of the concepts of like trying to live cleanly and off grid and
yeah. And I think that we are probably more in harmony with nature than a lot of people who think they are in a larger
when you consider everything and you put it all into baskets, you measure it and you write down and you compute it all, I'll bet we're way ahead of that curve.
And all the people who are doing the zero waste, but they're still buying like, have you seen those where it's zero waste, but they're buying all these bulk products? I'm like, okay, but where did that? You're not looking at what has had to happen for that product to get there, whether it's in a tub or plastic packaging. That is such a tiny little part of this.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe that is a part of how people get to that is just they're too micro focused on like, but you're cutting down a tree. And I'm like, well, okay. Yeah. That tree's gonna fall anyway.
You don't think people cut down trees and things to do the stuff that that you're holding in your hand right now somewhere else?
That you somehow think is better.
And you didn't physically do it, it doesn't exist?
And perhaps that is sort of the crux of the whole conversation. It's because you are actively seeing us do it because we share that.
It's true.
That becomes a point of finger pointing and like, but you're doing this.
Well, it's like in California, the pollution, emissions with cars. Oh my God, it is insane what the government does with their smog checks and things and rules, and some of them don't make any sense. And cars literally are amazingly clean there, more than most of the world. However, point out the fact that they have run a ton of businesses out that would otherwise have been good businesses and help the economy. And a good percentage, I think 2/3 or something, of all the particulates in the air in California are from factories in China coming right across on the air currents.
So gross.
So, yeah. But are you going to talk about China's pollution to make your tchotchkes and things and
your
whatever you bought off Temu?
Yeah.
And then threw away in a week?
We're far less consumer driven than I think most of the world even.
And that is probably the biggest environmental change is just getting off the super consumerist train.
We don't even buy new pants.
You've seen my videos. You can count the patches, and they keep increasing. Every video, there's another patch.
It's true.
Because they needed it. That being said, they're fairly well armored.
That's true. So, I mean, we got a little off there at the end, as we do. But I just think it's an interesting conversation, and I think it's maybe something that should be talked about a bit more, thought about a bit more before just jumping to conclusions about what people are doing, and whether we're part of nature. I don't know why that never occurred to me before, that we are always seen, talked about, portrayed as
all
like
of
this,
nature
and people,
and then humans, and we're somehow
separate. And you're against nature, and it's not just separate, but it's an adversarial sort of relationship.
And there's people that'll say, well, everything has its place and its thing, and it's something. Or you're like, what about mosquitoes? Can we get rid of mosquitoes? Do we need those? I don't think we need those. There's a few others on the list.
We could just get rid of them. Do they need to be here?
Do they need to be here? But somehow, and you're supposed to like live harmoniously with all those things, and or no.
We're supposed to live harmoniously with them, but we are not part of nature, which is a very,
right.
You can't have it both ways. So live harmoniously with the possum. But you're not part of nature, you're separate, but you're supposed to be part of it. Yeah.
And the controversy.
So it's just an interesting conversation, and hopefully
and
that spurs some more thoughts for people.
Maybe spur some thoughts. Give us some comments. Let us know, like think about the concept. Think about, like, because there's our personal take on it of what we believe, and then there's, you know, the question of, like, are people morally allowed to do a thing? Are you supposed to do a thing? Are you this or that? Are we just, should we be part of the ecosystem and mining and moving things around and this and that and changing the planet? And is that literally just part of the entire cycle of it?
Just like every other animal and creature and thing that exists on Earth.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So please, comments.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Well, now we have to get back to altering our world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a cluster of trees up there that are literally next to the house that.
Yeah.
No. So we got the winch out and we're pulling those down.
Because if we go through all this work to build a house, we do not want to lose it.
There's a big heavy butt tree that's left there.
I know.
That wood is really heavy. There's certain woods that are kind of light. We can just pick a log up, and there's other ones where it's just a little tiny log.
Oh,
and
man,
two of us grab a section of it. And we're like, why is it made of cement?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That one's gonna hurt when it falls on you.
Well, I will try to avoid that again. There's been a few close ones. Well, thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed it. Please comment, subscribe, like, pass it to somebody that may also be highly opinionated and could find this interesting. So, see you for the next one.